Welcome to the Just Basketball Show for September 28th. I'm Chris Manning. That is Brendon Kleen. Before we dive in too deep, I want to remind you that we do have an episode just up reacting to the Damian Lillard to the Milwaukee Bucks trade. Check that out. It's close to an hour on that trade from all angles. The Bucks, Dame, Giannis, why the Heat messed up in my opinion. The Suns, Brendan did some explaining of math with that. The Portland Trailblazers, what they're going to do. Drew Holiday landing spots. All of your angles on that mammoth trade covered in that. So go check that out right after this, or go to that, then come back to this. Just listen to them both. Do us a solid. But all of your Dame content is going to be in that episode. Had to break that one down solo. But Brendan got a fun set of previews today. Minnesota Timberwolves and Atlanta Hawks. We have Brad Rowland from Locked On Hawks up later in the show to talk about Atlanta. We went really deep into the Atlanta Hawks, so I think people will enjoy that. We're going to start today by talking about WNBA playoffs. I'm going to tell you first about our friends at Homage, the ultra-comfortable specialty apparel company with NBA and WNBA licenses that uses vintage-inspired designs to pay homage to the greatest stories, traditions, and figures across sports, music, and pop culture. Use the link below to make your purchase and support the Just Basketball Show. WNBA playoffs, Brendan, they are cruising along. We have seen now the New York Liberty even things up, and we have seen the Las Vegas Aces go up to a which game would you like to start with first? We're not going to go too deep into these. These are so early in these series, but what popped you from game two from each of those series?
I actually wonder if we shouldn't just talk about it a little bit through the lens of the MVP, which got announced, which is a little more relevant big picture, obviously, because like you said, it looks like the Aces might cruise here. We have Connecticut and New York tied, but all top three MVP finishers are in these series, two of them playing against one another in Alyssa Thomas and Breanna Stewart, and then A'ja Wilson reminding or I guess solidifying why she definitely is. Am I going to get into hot water doing her like we do him, or is that cool? Are we allowed to?
I think we're good. I think
do that.
I think those are the right pronouns.
Great,
right?
Yes. So A'ja to me is maybe where I just think I want to start. Like she is. I was thinking of Giannis watching her in this game.
Oh, okay.
In terms of players and how rare it is for there to be players who just affect the game. Incredibly skilled, incredibly athletic, incredibly intelligent. You have to be all those things to be an MVP like they both are. But the extra 5, 10, 15% that you get just by playing with the insane amount of force that they both play with, it's just one of those things that you can't really replicate or quantify. But when she's at her peak, it just feels different than anyone else to me. Because it's you look at the box score, 0 assists, 0 threes taken, and yet she just felt she made everybody better every second of the game and was absolutely unstoppable. And just does it in a way that's still pretty unique and very old-fashioned. And there's something about it that I think does just come down to how hard she plays and how forceful she plays and how physical she can be and how much she just takes it to her opponent. And so I don't know if I'm going to come out on some sort of ledge about she should be the MVP or something. I think any of the three candidates would have been great. I don't tend to get as fired up as some online did, similar to the NBA, but she's just on another level right now. And I think that's the biggest reason why this team has kind of gotten back on track as much as I think, perception has kind of shown them to be.
I mean, she's just incredibly dominant in every way she wants to be. I mean, there's nothing about the way she plays. There's nothing about what she does that teams have been able to stop. I mean, the only time we've ever seen her flustered is in 2 games against Liberty this year when they just did a really good job of hounding her, and you could tell she was frustrated by it post game. And I think maybe more than anyone else on this Aces roster, she's just kind of out for blood in these playoffs. Yeah. She's just out to be you're not taking this from me. We're the best team. I'm the best player. There is an assertiveness to the way she plays and the dominance on both ends that is just remarkable. The wings, I mean, to their credit, were really feisty in this game. They go down 8 in the first. They keep it really. They win the second, 19-18. It's a little dicier in the third for them, and they win the fourth by 6. This was a 7-point game. I think the Aces felt mostly in control because of Asia, but this Wings team was not going to go away. Even without great performances from Satu Sabali, who just hasn't been at the level I think that the Wings were going to need to win the series. They got 24 from Enrique. They got 20 from Howard. And, yes, Chelsea Gray was big. And, yes, Kelsey Plum has been awesome in this series so far. But this has been Asia. This has been the Asia Wilson is better than you show through these first couple games. It's been phenomenal.
Yeah, and we mentioned this, I think, coming off of the last series, but Vegas's ball movement just feels they've recaptured a lot of what made them so fun and scary when Candace Parker was at her peak, but obviously without actually getting her back. And that's a big testament to the rest of their star players. And Kelsey Plum is one of those players where, because she doesn't have the ball in her hands to start a lot of possessions, the assists don't always show how she can make the team around her better, but she never stops moving. She's so smart and decisive with where she puts herself when she takes shots, where she goes with the ball if she's not going to take a shot. And I think her decisiveness and aggressiveness has gone a long way in just keeping the machine kind of churning. And of course it helps when she makes her shots like it does for everybody, but you start to pile up when all of them are at their A game, and it is still going to be enough even without Candace Parker. We'll see what the next round brings, or if they can close this team out without it having to get interesting. But Sabali's been a little disappointing. I agree. She kind of fluctuates with her efficiency in general, and she's still impacting the game in other ways. Dallas feels a couple rotation pieces short. But if we want to jump over to the other series, at what point do we worry about Breanna Stewart? As a scorer specifically?
Yeah. Well, can I just give her – I want to just give her some flowers for a second, because the block she had in this game that really sealed the win was the exclamation point on the win. Was just straight up one of the best defensive plays you'll see in basketball. It was fun. Like, she just, with authority, controlled the rim, controlled the space. And, like, she was really effective in this game, like, in ways without having to score. But to your point, I think she looks a little worn down. Like, just looks a little tired, looks a little fatigued. Maybe there's something with this matchup. Maybe it's just she's carried such a heavy burden all year at times. But she was 3 of 13, 1 of 4 from 3, had 11 points. Like, doesn't just have the right lift. And if she plays, if she's playing like this in the finals, if they were to beat the Sun in this series, which I think this feels a little more like back on track for them to maybe do that. I think they're going to need her to be better. And Brennan, I think if you look at this Liberty roster, their bench, Dolson plays 2 minutes, Thornton plays 7, and Maria Johannes, who I really like, and I just think is like kind of a necessary chaotic piece for them, plays 3 minutes. I almost wonder to some degree if they're like over just throwing the minutes like way too in the deep end for them to kind of make this as manageable. Like I don't want to say like Stewie should only be playing like 30 minutes, but could she play like 34 and you get more out of the 34 if she's playing that instead of 39?
Yeah, maybe. I think Kayla Thornton would be the one person you would think could step up, and it is a little bit of a surprise. I think that she hasn't played more. I think she's kind of perfect physically and versatility-wise for what Connecticut kind of makes you do. Like, theoretically, like, Dolson should be playing more, but Connecticut doesn't have a single traditional center on their roster, so what do? She's not going to guard Alyssa Thomas. She's not going to guard DeWanna Bonner. Okay, then she's probably not going to play. So, yeah, Thornton would be the one, and I'm sure it would go a long way. She just is so up and down with her shot that's a tough one too. Yeah, I tend to agree. If they don't go down early in Game 3, I wouldn't be surprised if you see an early second quarter stretch where Johannes in particular gets more run and gets some sets run for her and just does her kind of, pickup game ball a little bit, which really can change games. But yeah, it's pretty fascinating. Breanna Stewart, back to her, she in her past 6 games dating back, she scored 40 on September 5th against Dallas. Since then, 9 of 16, 4 of 17, 3 of 16, 9 of 25, 7 of 25, and now 3 of 13. And they've been winning. They're 4-2 in those games, but that's a trend, and it's, almost a month long now. So it would probably suit them well to try to get through this series quicker, and so maybe that does, lean in the direction of play these starters more minutes and try to just end this series so that you can be rested for the finals. But they're going to need her to score to beat the Aces. They're going to need all of their players to be at the top of their game, like we were just talking about. It looks like Vegas's are, and right now that's not the case.
I would feel a little bit nervous right now if I'm the Liberty. They've had to really be in the muck these first 2 games, Brendan, and to their credit, they really dealt with it in Game 2 in a way that I think speaks well of their grittiness as a team, their ability to kind of win without things being
Rebounding
perfect.
was huge.
Rebounding was absolutely huge. A 37 to set 31 advantage on the glass, a really big deal. I mean, but they're winning games where it's like, it's not. Sabrina was 5 of 12. She really did her work at the line in this game. They're getting great performances of Bachani Laney. They're getting good performances. Courtney Vandersloot was excellent, I think, in this game from a scorer in a way that she hasn't always been. It's kind of reluctant to be at times, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, her aggressiveness in Game 2 was huge, and then Laney having the big first quarter like she did, I think that was kind of the difference. And then the rebounding. I mean, 24 combined for Stewie and Jonquel and 7 on the offensive glass. Like that was a big thing for Connecticut in Game 1, was that they actually out-rebounded the Liberty, which just is not very common. There's not a lot of teams that can do that to them. So if they can keep that in check, I mean, Tiffany Hayes had another huge game. She doesn't tend to, fill it up 5 out of 5 games. So, she's a great player, but you wouldn't expect that every night in her mid-30s. So if she slows down, if any of these things start to crack, you could see probably a blowout Liberty win is not out of the question, but you're right that it's been a lot harder than I think we expected so far.
If you were to break it down now, then we'll talk about the Wolves. You get 100%, 100 points, whatever. Mm-hmm. How would you break that down between Aces winning the title, Liberty winning the title, and the Sun? And all respect to the Wings, I think we know where that series is going. I'm going to put them at 0.
Okay.
I'll do this first. I would go Aces. It feels like Aces 60, 65% right now. They just feel so much better right now. I think you got is Liberty based on their track record. I'll give them, if Aces at 65, I'll give the Liberty 25, and I'll give the Sun 10.
All right. I don't anticipate Connecticut is going to win this series, despite how competitive, and they deserve a world of credit. I still think it's a little bit, glue and scotch tape and whatnot right now for them to be winning the way that they are, staying competitive the way that they are. So I'll go 10% for them, and I'll just say 45 apiece for New York and Vegas. I don't want to lean too far in either direction until we actually see them play each other again, which, man, I'm getting very excited, Chris. We're almost there. We've been waiting since May, and here we are.
We need it, and we also we're in a world now where Breanna Stewart won the MVP, and Asia Wilson is out here saying it hurts like hell to not be doing take stuff personally in a way that is very good for us as consumers of basketball.
Yeah. Yep.
Can we
it's gonna popcorn. Seriously, I know. Just emergency assembly of the Players Association and the Board of Governors. Just change the CBA, get ESPN on board. Let's just do 4 out of 7 here, because it's gonna. I feel like the series is gonna have a 3-point differential, and it's gonna go down to the buzzer of Game 5. It just feels like that's where we're headed.
Yeah. I will just, if we want to really figure this out financially, based on what I'm reading about sports right now, I feel like we just need Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift to be courtside for one game, and we've solved this issue.
Yeah, is Dion free? Can he fit another couple of appearances in his schedule?
Yeah.
Boulder's pretty close to Vegas. It's probably an hour, 2 flight. Get over there.
Tell me, Dion, let's make it happen. We need Tom Brady back at a game. We need something. We need just some rub, Yeah. We need someone we need someone to ask Kathy Engelbert 2 questions. Number 1, why can't this be 7 games? And number 2, how many teams are on the expansion list right now?
Speaking of, did you see the news? We don't have to spend time on it now, but
not.
The Warriors are going to bring a team to Oakland. To San Francisco, I should say. Yeah, Marcus Thompson from The Athletic broke that news, I believe, last night or the night before, that the Warriors are expected to be in the ownership group of one of the expansion teams. And what he was saying made it sound like their deadline for 2025, or I guess timeline, almost sounded like it might be sooner than that, but they're not going to bring only one team in. So then it started making me wonder, are we talking about next season? But I kind of doubt that. So either way, it's good news to have it be the Warriors, because that's a committed ownership group for sure.
Well, hey, number one, could you imagine the conspiracy theories if those teams come in next year and the Warriors ownership group gets Caitlin Clark?
Yeah, right. It would honestly be the perfect kind of controversy to drum up interest in that team and the league. But let's play things fair.
Secondly, do you know how soon until they're tampering with Breanna Stewart, unabashed Warriors fan and friend to that region of the country?
Yeah, maybe the Liberty already knew that this was happening, and that's why they got that extension with Sabrina Dunn stat.
Yeah,
they were like, okay,
yeah,
can't let her even sniff free agency because she's about to move. She works for Oregon in the off season, so yeah.
I'm very proud Steph Curry friend and supporters.
Oh yeah. Danger
zone. All right, move on. Danger zone. Just love some tampering, love some drama. It's only good things. All right, Minnesota Timberwolves, Brendon, a team that has had lots of questions about them after they traded for Rudy Gobert last year. Karl-Anthony Towns obviously misses much of the season. And that's where I'm going with our first topic here, most important player. I'm going to say Cat.
Yeah, same.
This is someone, there's flaws in his game. I'm not the biggest believer in Cat as a backbone of a championship team by any means. But I think this is someone who they really needed last year. They need his shooting. They need his spacing. They need the best version of him. If this team is going to take a step forward, I think they need Cat healthy. They need Cat motivated. They need Cat contributing to be a real asset to this Ant-led team. I think that's where we're at with this.
So I think it's worth exploring within that. You said you're not a believer of him as the backbone of a championship team. I mean, definitely think we can say definitively now that he is not the number one player on a championship team. I think that ship has sailed. We've seen enough versions of him, enough teammates, enough setups where even when he's had his best seasons or the team has been at its best, he's not been the best player. So why would you say that he could be? But thinking about him, looking back at his stats, watching back some of their stuff, I am a part-time defender of the Rudy Gobert trade. Is that fair to say, Chris? I dabble in defense of that trade.
You might be a little further above part-time. You're part-time but aspiring to get 40 hours a week.
Okay, so when the job I just left, I was 0.6 FTE, so 3/5 time. Is that about what we would say? Okay, so with that said, though, I did get a little bit bummed thinking again about that trade and remembering specifically the playoff series in 2022, the way that team was set up, and the fact that for the first time we really had a blueprint for what it could look like for him to be one of the vertebrae of a backbone of a championship team at least. And the presence of Rudy Gobert removes any of the upside of what the best peak version of Karl-Anthony Towns can be. And so while I don't think that the reason I defend it is because I think people want to bury Minnesota as a winning team as a result of the trade. And they just proved last year that they're going to be around. But to me, the best version of Towns is at the center position, changing the game offensively with his perimeter skill set in a way that only centers can do, that perimeter-oriented centers can do in a way that other players are just expected to operate on the perimeter, so it doesn't give you any sort of advantage. But when I look at what he could get better at, I also think that revolves around playing inside more, killing it on the offensive glass, becoming more of a rim protector, getting to the free throw line more. None of those are things he can do with Rudy Gobert. And so, if I try to dream up what the best version of a Karl-Anthony Towns season is this year, he went a long way, taking more threes last year, upping his assist rate, really doing his part offensively to adjust, it's like, is the best version of Towns this year like playing as if he's, Cam Johnson when Gobert's on the court, and then just like really dominating as like the backup 5 for this team next to Naz Reid? That sucks. Like, that's not putting a dude in position to succeed. And I think that like frustrated me all over again from just a maximizing of talent standpoint.
I think that's right. I think he's also just I think some of the concerns you have with him, at least I do, defensively in particular, there was like this Austin Rivers thing that went around recently about like how like why don't guards get more like love for defensive player of the year? Like, we're the ones guarding, guys one-on-one all the time. I kind of understand that argument, but it's also like big men are important to setting a structure of an entire defense. You cannot build like a competent defense for anybody unless you have a big man who teams actually have to worry about in the paint. Cat's just never been that guy. That's why they went and did the Gobert trade. It's like, okay, we understand how good you are offensively. You're not Jokic, but like you're pretty good. You can really space it. You need defensive support. That's to me always been the hang up with him. It's just he feels sometimes like a one-way player, even with some of the things where I agree he's not always been set up perfectly, and this has not been, the most pristinely run organization during his time in the NBA. Ryan Saunders, solid guy by all accounts, like been around the game for a long time. It's not like equipped
2023 NBA champion.
Yeah, who am I to say here? But like, wasn't really equipped to be an NBA head coach at that time. I think in retrospect, right?
Yeah.
And then you do this Gobert thing, and it's like, yeah, and then he goes through all this last year. Last year probably feels crazy to him because it's like you bring in Gobert and you're asking him to change everything again and change his position in a way that's not helpful. And then like he's dealing with all this personal stuff. Like, it's probably been in a way
and
that
almost tore his Achilles. Yeah, physically.
Like, it's been a hellacious run for him. So like I want to be sympathetic, but there's just stuff where I'm just like, okay, like it's kind of like, is it fair to look at this now and be like, is it kind of getting close to put up or shut up time for what?
They should have traded him this year. This offseason. Like, I hate to make these season previews about trades because, well, we already did it with Chicago on the last episode, and like we talked briefly about it with Trae or Pascal with Atlanta, and like it's the NBA, so it's inevitable. But yeah, they obviously should have traded him. I think anybody not named like Mark Lowry, Alex Rodriguez, or Tim Connolly would say so, right? I don't know of any NBA fan who thinks that they should run this thing back in a vacuum. Obviously, what are they going to get for Towns? All that stuff matters, but like, I just don't think that the ceiling of what they can be is much higher than what it was last year, even though they didn't get the best version of Towns. Like, I try to make the case to myself, and we're going to do this with best case, worst case, and over under later on in the segment of like, okay, if they get a healthy Towns and they are 20% better as a tandem, they figure some things out, they get better at the skills they need to get better at, how much better does that make them as a team? And I just think that the limit is so low on that because the fit is just so flawed. Like, to your point about the defense, I think, yes, he's never going to be great at defense, but I think what he's best at is the stuff that centers do. And when he last year, and like the Denver matchup got a lot of attention because they matched up well, but I think that's because even though Denver is impossible to guard, they do simplify what you have to do to defend them. Stick to your man.
Yeah.
Rotate and switch when you need to. Don't foul, rebound. Like, it isn't the Warriors that you're trying to keep track of. And so I think that matchup actually made them look better. But even in that series, and obviously at times during the regular season, asking Karl-Anthony Towns to navigate screens and guard like movement shooters like Michael Porter Jr., or I watched it early on in the regular season last year before Towns got hurt with Cam Johnson in the early part of the Suns season at a home game that I attended. And it's just like, it's a nightmare, but what do you expect? You think he's going to be like out there like he's Alex Caruso? What are we doing?
Or like, is he going to turn in? Yeah, he's never going to be like Draymond. Like, he's not going to be able to just do all these different things defensively. And it's like, if you told me the best way to set him up for success defensively was like a Mike Conley type of point guard, and then like bigger forwards like Jalen and Kyle Anderson and whatnot.
And Jared Vanderbilt, right? Yeah. Who they traded, who was on the team the first time. And Beverly was on that team. Like, that's what I meant by that was kind of the peak version of it.
Yeah, and it's like you could have just kept running versions of that back, and instead you went for Rudy Gobert.
Yeah. We didn't say Ant, but I just want anybody who's worried, if you're finding yourself on this feed or this YouTube channel and you're worried, do these guys know how good Anthony Edwards is? Or do they know what's up here, whose team this actually is? I would just recommend hit subscribe and follow first, and then listen to any episode we've done over the past 6 months, and inevitably we will mention Anthony Edwards and talk him up plenty. But I mean, he is the best player on this team. I just think if we're being realistic about the ceiling and floor and future, that is Towns, and I don't know how you can make a different case, honestly.
Yeah, you could say Ant's going to ascend to first team All-NBA this year, and that's your case. But I think that could happen, and I'd still be okay, what's going on with Karl? Because I kind of just need Karl to Ant could get there, it could elevate them, but is it enough to really change the trajectory? And it's on Karl.
And tell me the last superstar who even took a leap like Ant did could this year offensively, who had such bad fit and spacing on the offensive end of the floor that overcame that and still turned the team into a great offense.
Look at Dame's season last year.
Mm-hmm.
He had this amazing All-NBA season, and it just didn't matter because the rest of the roster wasn't up to stuff.
And this was, Ant was an All-Star last year, and this was a bottom 10 offense. So that's what we're talking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And Karl has to be part of them. And look, Chris Finch as a coach should be the offensive guy. That's kind of what his reputation is building really interesting good offenses. We'll never know, but I'd also love to know what he thought about the Gobert trade. That's not the original thought, but it's not exactly how I'd ever imagined his systems working, coming to understand them. All right, player will be talking at the end of the season. Kind of, Brendan, to me, this was one of the tougher rosters in prepping for this because they don't have an ascendant young guy in a way that you could be they have this fringe rotation guy who's really going to break forward in some way, right? That's not what we're staring at here. So, and you could go Ant for this, I think.
Everybody's talking about Ant. He was the number one scorer on the national team. So, yeah, I think that would be underselling him a little bit.
So I just went Jaden McDaniels. I think this is someone who has growing potential as a 3-4, is going to get more experience on ball, is going to continue to be a vital piece for this team, and is just such a sensational defender. I love what he is. I love the upside of what this guy is going to be. I think we're just scratching the surface. He's just 22. We're really just getting into what he's going to be as a player. Nearly 40% from three last year. If that's real, that's a really, really big deal. Last year was a big step forward for him, but he still feels 12.1 points, 4 boards, 2 assists, good numbers from three. A lot of the value is on the defensive end, but I think there's another offensive level to come that really could unlock a lot for him. And if he gets to 15 a game and remains at efficiency and things click and the defensive stuff stays there, you have just a great player. Those aren't even crazy jumps, but there's just little things to come from Jaden that I think are really, really intriguing.
Absolutely. I think the world of this dude. I think we talked about his contract extension earlier in the offseason, and it at least came up that it could be a max. Right? That's the potential we're talking about. I don't think if you were to say pay Jaden McDaniels for what he's done in the league, you would not give him a max, but he's 22, so easily could become worthy of that. And I looked up the Basketball Index stat website has these talent metric grades that they give out based on minute skills, granular skills that they give ratings for, and it's an A to F scale. Perimeter isolation defense for Jaden McDaniels last season, they actually did not give a letter. They put a crown icon in that slot. So I think that illustrates what this dude can do. But offense, and if he gets a little bit bigger and stronger like that, obviously that evolution always happens for young defensive players. Mikal Bridges had a similar process and everything. But offensively, what's exciting about him is he took a leap in basically everything you would want to see him take a leap in last year. Got to the line more. He upped his assist rate. Turnovers went up a little bit, but that's fine. Got to the rim more. Got to mid-range more. Finished better. And he's been a great three-point shooter spot up since he basically stepped foot in the league. When you start to paint it all together, it's kind of is a max player. That kind of is a Mikal Bridges type, I mean, OG Anunoby, like those guys who we talk about as some of the most valuable possible role players to have in the entire league, he's well on his way to being that. So I think that's a great call. I think most NBA fans know him as the guy who broke his hand.
Which is a real bummer. I wanted to see him on that stage,
Yeah. Yeah.
Just the last note on him. He had stuff last year. Basically, it was on the same usage as he had the year before. 15.7 usage last year, was at 15 the year before. That's like a very minor difference. Dunks and threes has expected wins as like a stat they have. He added 6.3 expected wins to the Wolves last year. That's in the top, that's in the 86th percentile. That's outrageous for a guy that is that low usage. He rates out so well in terms of in terms of data numbers.
Yeah.
Data numbers. In terms of the data, in terms of analytics.
Yeah.
This is a guy that, like, if you watch and then you look at the numbers, it all kind of clicks together in a way where you're just kind of waiting for, what is the ceiling here and what can it go.
And he was one of these guys that early in high school and in college did have the ball more and has already successfully worked backward to be a 3-and-D role player in the NBA, but is now at a...
That's hard.
It is. And he did it right away. Like, it's so impressive. And then now he is already ahead of schedule where he can start to kind of retrofit back to, all right, now let me remember what it was like when I was 17 and start to add some of the on-ball reps over time too. My player we're going to be talking about at the end of the season is Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I figured we would talk about Jaden McDaniels, so I did just want to talk about Nickeil as well. He was awesome in the Nuggets series, guarding Jamal Murray and knocking down his threes. I think that's the part that has gotten lost. Like, he always had the on-ball ability dating back to Virginia Tech defensively. Like, guarding at the point of attack is exactly why he got drafted. But the question has always been, can he make his threes? And he did it in that Nuggets series. He was at 39%. He was at 37% in the regular season and 41% the regular season prior. He was good for Canada, similar type of thing to what we saw for Minnesota. He started out early in the FIBA run, not a huge part of their rotation, playing but not closing, whatever, and then he just earned minutes because if he can defend, make good decisions with the ball, and make threes, there's no reason to keep him off of this roster. And they got rid of Jordan McLaughlin and their other backup point guard, Jalen Noel, and so this year is kind of set up for he can be one of the guys who steps up and provides some of that. I think the opportunity will be there. So I would not be surprised if, come April, he's in their playoff rotation pretty definitively.
Yeah, I'm a fan. I believe in bigger guards. I believe in how he fits with Ant. I think I think they have a need long-term at guard here, just considering Mike Conley's age, and if he's someone that can really further establish himself to be a little more crisp, a little more kind of involved in that way, that would be a really big win, I think, for this group. Would you say? Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, they just re-signed him, so obviously they are ready to kind of watch that breakout happen. And they've always drafted well. They've always developed well. I mean, even before Tim Connolly, but he did the same in Denver, so I would expect I just think young players here are going to improve and contribute at a high level, and he should be one of them. Best lineup last year.
Really good contract too, by the way, for Alexander Walker. Just looked it up. I just forgotten it. Less than $5 million a year is really good for this guy. It's really good.
Absolutely. Last year, best lineup for this team. High volume. They had a lot of weirdness because of Towns being out and them trying to figure out the two big stuff. But if you just combine volume and whatever, Conley, Ant, McDaniels, Slow-Mo, Gobert. Pretty understandable why that would be their best lineup. But overall, if you just look at the on-off, Towns was a larger net positive for them when he was out there than Gobert. There just weren't enough consistent lineups to show that in the data for one unit. My question before you give yours is, did your best lineup have both of the bigs?
So yes, but I had a caveat to myself for that reason. I had a little note where it's like, are we sure? Are we sure?
Yeah. I tend to lean no, but give me yours.
Which is, so my first instinct was to go Conley and McDaniels, Cat, Gobert. Just put your most talented five.
Their starting lineup, basically, right?
Yeah, just say that's your five. But my real instinct, I think this works better is Conley, Ant, McDaniels, Kyle Anderson, and Cat.
Okay. So, my best lineup for the 2024 Minnesota Timberwolves, Mike Conley. I thought a lot about not having him on here, but I just think the numbers showed how important and valuable he was for them when he was out there. Point of attack defense, getting their offense going, trying to figure out the two big stuff. I think on the net, he has to be out there. Anthony Edwards, no-brainer, scorer, shooter, defender, athletic, energy, everything you need. I have Nickeil Alexander-Walker in this lineup. I believe enough in the fact that he can provide team defense as well as on-ball defense and enough shooting and passing to be part of their best lineups for the first time in his career. I have Jaden McDaniels. That should come as no surprise. He's part of how their small ball lineups have to work. I'm expecting a huge breakout, scoring, defense, everything we just talked about. And then Karl-Anthony Towns is the center that I'm going to have here. I'm going to basically bet on they can recreate the magic of 2022 when Gobert is off the court and that they can kind of cobble together a lineup that brings out what was so tantalizing and interesting about their run that first season when they broke through together. Obviously, the problem is they have a 7-footer playing 32 minutes a game who is holding these lineups back from actually playing together.
So here's the problem. Here's where I think the real problem comes in for them with these lineups. I think your lineup's great. I think what we're outlining here is great. Conley, Ant, McDaniels, and Cat, and then you put whoever in that fourth spot I think really works. I think Anderson I lean to just because I like the defense. I like the ability to kind of give them a little bit of in-between offense. Kind of as a counter to Cat, and I think the size and the wing is good. But Nickeil Alexander-Walker can defend different spots. You can have this different flexibility. This team could keep that core identity with what they're doing with these lineups if they had just used what they did to trade for Gobert on a wing, and then Naz Reid could play more because Naz Reid is fucking awesome. And Naz Reid deserves to play more and should be an absolute killer on this team when he's playing by himself at the 5. And yet, how hard is it going to be to find minutes to play Naz Reid at the 5 just because of Gobert and Cat? Brandon, honestly, the further we get into this and we talk about this, I have no idea how you're still a part-timer defending the Gobert trade. Because the more and more we talk about this, I'm just why? You had something here.
Yeah.
I'm just staring at it, and it's why?
So what it really is just it's more like a bigger thing
you love
of
screen assist. You love screen assists.
Yeah.
That's it. You just love them,
Really one of my passions. Give me 1 second. So people can actually see me as I defend the Gobert trade.
Yeah. We're not cutting that, by the way.
That's just my athleticism showing, reaching up and pulling and coming and sitting right back down.
People that aren't watching YouTube, by the way, you have a great hat. I've been meaning to compliment this on you this whole time.
Yeah.
It's
for shout out Garrett. I went to a concert one time with one of my best friends I've known him since I was 8. And we saw this hat in the bathroom at this super janky club bar thing that this band was playing at. And I was like, I just saw this dude with an untitled name. It was right when it had come out, and he was like, nice. And then my birthday comes around and he came in clutch, hooked it up. So that's shout out Garrett. But the only defense that I have of the Gobert trade really is I just get tired in NBA fandom that everything has to become trolling and trashing. And it's because the Gobert trade is a meme, then the Wolves suck. And it's just think a little bit harder. That's really the only defense that I have of it. But no, I'm fully on board, and I genuinely am. I'm not just saying it to be revisionist and be hip about it and be well, I loved what they had in 2022. But I really did, and I really thought that was the most clear vision of a Cat team that did not have Jimmy Butler on it that we've seen. And it felt like the young talent was coming. But what's funny is they kind of are shadow building their post-trade of one of those two guys team already. With the Naz Reid extension, they're going to extend Jaden McDaniels shortly. They kept Kyle Anderson. They're re-signing some of these young guys. You can already kind of see the more small ball team that's shaping up once they get rid of one of these two dudes. It just hasn't happened yet. All right, best case. Can we jump there?
Yeah.
I have the Towns-Gobert tandem. Towns adjusts a little bit. Gobert bounces back. Conley has another year in him. The young guys get better, and the offense is good enough, improves enough to be a top 6 team in the West.
Yeah, I agree. I think the same thing. I think if it's all about Ant ascending in the way we expect, and I think everything just looking more comfortable in year 2, Even without the real year to kind of figure things out, I think just because of Towns' absence last year, there's still going to be some adjustment there. But if it can just be smoothed out and you find a way to work, and even if some of your lineups are funky, lean into the funkiness, make it work, profit. What's your worst case?
Worst case, I have the Cat-Gobert tandem hits rock bottom and holds the rest of the team back, so Minnesota has to take a bad trade just to reset.
Yeah, trading Gobert for like 20 cents on the dollar.
Or trading 20 cents and Gobert for nothing. Trading $1.20 for a pocket of air. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
God,
it could get pretty rough.
I don't even know where you could trade Gobert. Like Charlotte? Like you trying to get like just stuff out of Charlotte?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, it would take too long to like actually math it out, but like, is there any team in the NBA that would even take him if you were attaching stuff to him? He has 3 years and like 150 million, 140, 150 million left on his contract. Like, is there even a team that would like roster him?
Could you panic Dallas into doing it?
I kind of don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Which is, again, why they should have just traded Towns now.
Or they should have just never traded for Gobert in the first place.
Well, yes, but that you're making the Wolves a meme, Chris. You're going to trigger my defense mechanisms here.
Yeah,
I'm a Minneapolisan at heart. I'm just really go north. Is that what they say?
When I was a kid, like the Wolves were my Western Conference team because I got to pick like 2 games a year to go to with my dad, and I always picked the Wolves because I wanted to see KG, and then that morphed into Kevin Love.
Mm. And now you get KG 2.0 in your backyard.
But he's not mean enough for that comparison.
No, that's true. Nobody that's earned. You have to prove it. You have to really get into some shit to get the Garnett 2.0, 3.0.
Also, I don't know if you follow Kevin Garnett on Instagram. I do. Not sure exactly why. Because he's Kevin Garnett, I guess.
I do not.
But Katie Davidson, who used to work for the Wolves on their media team and wrote about them and stuff. Really good follow on Twitter. She had pointed out this, and then now I can't look at his Instagram without thinking about this, that he posts like the 50-year-old who reposts every single meme that he sees. That's just his Instagram stories.
I love that.
And then it's like a lot of like Paul Pierce saying really out of pocket stuff on KG's podcast, and I'm like, okay, Paul, calm down.
Just like spends an extraordinary amount of time with the IG app open on his phone. Like, Kevin, please find other things to be doing.
I would love to know what the screen time is for KG on Instagram. It's like really
yeah, exactly.
All right, worst case.
I have the under.
Okay.
Sorry, your worst case.
Look, worst case is just that they can't figure this out, and it's the same thing. It's just, does this get goofy? And then they also just have had this run of unluckiness, like just bad luck. Mm-hmm. Like, does someone get hurt? Just the bad vibes continue here, and like they're left just kind of searching for an identity when the point of Chris Finch, and I think the point of some of their moves has been getting a real identity. All right, over under 44.5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have the under. This is where I'll talk a little bit about Ant, and we mentioned it a minute ago, but I think we have to also be realistic about the number of things that Ant has to improve at to even get to the point where we're talking about him being able to lift as ill-fitting of a team as this one is going to be. Like, even if you think the world of him, is he going to improve as a passer, improve as a pull-up jump shooter, and improve as a decision maker all in one season enough to lift a team in a way that is like reserved for the best of the best in the entire NBA? Like, that is a lot to ask for in year 3 of a guy who, even as great as he is, has a lot of things left to kind of fill out in his game. So that's why that case I can't quite get there with. And again, to repeat, this was a bottom 10 offense last year. How much higher than that do you think it can reasonably get? And what are the trade-offs if they do things rotation-wise to improve the offense on the defense, which was top 10, right? And if Gobert continues to deteriorate, can he anchor a unit that you just pencil in for top 10 anymore? Or is it more of a conversation as to whether that's the case anymore? So maybe there's a truly dominant Gobert season, even better than he was last year, and he reverses course and just shocks us all. That makes the defense go from like 8th to 3rd, 2nd, 1st. and that might help them hit the over if the offense gets a little better as well. But I think more times than not they go under, so that's why I have under 44.5.
Yeah, 42 wins last year, basically, according to Clean of the Glass, like about what they expect to win based on their net rating, which was 0.5. That was their point differential last year. It's like very much just like straight in the middle. I would have the under as well. And that that I think reflects a little bit on this roster. It reflects a little bit on Cat. You would think Cat is good enough to maybe add some wins here, but I just think this roster and overall setup is just, it puts them in a really precarious place. Hope for better things for them, but we will see. All right, coming up next, Brad Rowland on the Atlanta Hawks previewing Trae Young's team with Quinn Snyder at the helm. Can't wait for you guys to listen. And again, go listen to us talk about Dame too if you haven't already. Thrilled to be joined now by Brad Rowland, host of Locked On Hawks, has a Patreon, has words at Dime on Uprocks, and Brad, dare I say, I think one of my favorite people in this whole little basketball sphere. My friend, how are you?
I am well. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on this particular podcast with two great men. That's what I'll say.
Oh, wow.
Just fantastic content machine right here. Thank you for being thank you for being here. Thank you for having me. All that fun stuff.
Brad, I got to say, before we dive into talking about the Atlanta Hawks and everything going on with this team, I do like that you said I am well, because that reminded me of fellow Atlantean Kevin Arnovitz, who no longer does podcasts, and I dearly miss him doing podcasts with Zach Lowe. But every time he said I am well, brought a smile on my face. So I'm glad that that is, we're still doing that. It makes me happy.
It's
Grammar
a little
is good.
homage, honestly, a little homage to him, who I am friends with Kevin because he is from Atlanta, and yeah, a little bit of a shout out to my guy. So there you go.
All right. Atlanta Hawks, a team that had a interesting season last year, changed coaches, didn't hit the highs that they did the year before. We're going to start with most important player. Brad, I'm going to let you go first on this. I want to see how you maybe answer this, because I could talk myself into a couple different things here, but there's probably a very obvious one. So where do you go with most important Atlanta Hawk?
Okay, so I was going to ask what the interpretation is, because clearly Trae Young is the most important Hawk. It's not even particularly close. But that isn't, like, I also think that Trae Young is kind of a given, which maybe is a controversy, because I have said this before. I feel like Trae Young is now underrated, which is kind of surprising and weird based on where I thought he would be going into year 5. Like, he's like the archetype of a player that probably shouldn't be underrated, because he averages a lot of points and does a lot of things. And I generally find myself being lower on players like Trae Young, if that makes sense. Poor defense, scorers, all that stuff. But, like, I think the hate has gone too far on Trae Young. Anyway, he's the objective answer. And then there's, like, the other framing is, like, swing piece kind of thing. There's the lower level importance of, like, pivot points. And I have different answers for that. But as far as objectively most important player, it's pretty clearly Trae Young.
What are we talked about this with Tyrese Haliburton, and I like getting the people who watch these guys literally every day's perspective on where else they can go. And obviously Trae's been around longer than Tyrese, and we touched on this actually a little bit with LaMelo Ball too, Chris, with these point guards. It's easy to think of them as one thing, because so many guys in the modern NBA dominate the ball so much that it's like, well, what even can change? We see what they do, what they want to do 50 times a game when they're handling the ball as much as they are. But within what we know, we're not going to recreate the wheel with Trae Young and this far into his basketball life, I don't think. But realistically, whether it's Quinn Snyder related, Brad, or it's DeJounte Murray related, or it's whatever the roster is going to look like, or his mentality, whatever direction you want to take it, is there something that can change about Trae Young that would alleviate some of the hatred that he does get, or some of the flaws that we obviously know he has, that could make him a little bit closer to, like, the top version of what we think he can be?
Yeah, I think it's multi-layered, and it's on the margins, which I know you guys host podcasts about individual teams as well, and, like, stuff on the margins gets lost nationally, in particular, especially when it comes to teams that are not covered every day, like the teams that we kind of cover for the most part, the three of us. At any rate,
for yourself.
Well, yeah, not anymore. I guess the Suns are now mainstream. But no, it's one of those things where, like, I could do 10 minutes on this and I won't, but Trae Young has regularly gets referred to as the worst defensive player in the NBA. People just throw it out there as if it's a fact, and like that's a pretty lazy way of framing it. I don't think that he is the worst defender in the NBA. Number one, he might have been at one point. I'll grant that, but also, I mean, it's kind of the same thing as the Cavs. I'm speaking Chris's language now, but how bad can a point guard be defensively? Is a nuanced comment. Like I don't think there's any way Trae Young is the most harmful defensive player in the league. No chance. A bad defensive center is way more harmful than Trae Young.
Sure.
All those things. So that's part of it. I think he's already taken a step forward defensively. Is he ever going to be good defensively? He's not. But I think he's already gone from first percentile to 15th percentile or something like that. You know what I mean? He's gotten better. But as far as like the actual side of the floor that really matters for Trae, there's this like white whale of Trae being an off-ball mover. The Steph comparisons back to the draft, which were, just to be very clear, always silly. They have really never materialized like at all. He doesn't to this point. He's really never been a threat off the ball. He could be one. He's a guy who can shoot from long range. When he flashes it in just the small instances, he can really be a threat there. But it's a mentality thing, and that's what makes Steph so great in a lot of ways, is that his motor runs and he can run off the ball. And Trae Young, for all of his strengths, and again, I think he's underrated, has not ever shown the willingness. And I use that word intentionally, willingness, desire to move off the ball, like even to 20% of that. So that would be the area that I'd focus on, just being more of a threat without the ball. Is because I think on the ball, you can rank it however you want to. Trae Young is one of the 5 best on-ball creators in the NBA, in my opinion. He is that good. He's incredible at it. There are limitations when you're 6'1". I will certainly grant that. There are things he can't do. But if there is a level to jump, other than just like the broad like efficiency, because last year he wasn't terribly efficient compared to previous years. That's an easy one. But as far as like an actual thing in his game, I would say it's taking the next step to be more of a threat off the ball, to operate and be a little bit more malleable on a team that now has a guy who's not as good as he is, but a guy who's a real creator in DeJounte Murray. And that partnership's going to get a lot of attention it already has, but Trae could do a little bit more in general to just be more dynamic when he's not just in his natural element of running pick and roll.
So my answer to this is Trae Young as well, but it's in this specific context. It is a full year with Quinn Snyder, who's one of the most detailed, most innovative, most, I think, well thought of offensive minds we have in the league, who, and no disrespect to Nate McMillan, but like this is a step up as far as offensive orchestration. This is a step up as far as designing something for Trae to empower Trae, and I think also push him out of his comfort zone. Quinn Snyder can say, look what I did for Donovan Mitchell. Like, look at what I can do for you and help elevate you. I think that is a very compelling case. And you have DeJounte there as well. I think he'll be boosted by this. So it's, to me, it's Trae, and under the crux of he gets a full year, not just part of a season. He gets a full training camp, a full preseason, a full season to work with Quinn Snyder. And I think what comes out of that, can't wait.
Yeah, so I didn't pick a player. I picked Quinn Snyder, so we might as well just kind of dive in. He was a player. He at one point played basketball, so he counts. To just tie up the defense note, though, one thing, because I this afternoon watched the closeout game, Boston-Atlanta, from this past year, and like I couldn't help but, maybe it's too reductive, but I still kept thinking like, it would go a long way if your kind of comparison, Brad, of like he went from the 1st percentile to the 15th. Could he go to the 30th if he was just more decisive? Because that's the thing that makes no sense for a guy that's been in the league as long as he has. There's times when he'll stunt in from the corner and, yeah, he might actually kind of jostle the ball loose. Like, he might rotate over. Like, there are times when he ends up being the low man and it's like he's not going to do much, but he's there, right? So, like, I do notice the reading at a higher level than it used to be. He's probably not going to get stronger. I think with the Snyder stuff, the idea of how they are even going to play defense this year is an open question. And if he's going to switch, or when he has switched, that's not going to go great. But as a helper and as a executor, if he just like did what he, I think, knows he's supposed to do, that would go such a long way. Because I agree with you completely that a point guard on a pretty solid a pretty solidly schemed defense with a legitimate center rotation and some wing depth isn't supposed to be that damaging, but I do think there's times when he is, simply because it's like, we're switching the screen. Where the hell did Trae just end up? You know what I mean? And it's like,
Yeah.
but why? Like, there's no real reason that he can't do that, right? Like, as long as we assume and agree that he's like a competent athlete, which of course he is, then like execute it, right? So I think that there's some stuff there, and maybe that is part of the Murray thing of the less and less he might have to do offensively. In theory, maybe that focus and engagement can be there, and there's not the same level of exhaustion and when am I getting the ball the next time, all that stuff. But when it comes to Snyder, I think defense is kind of where I look. I don't know. I think the personnel shift of getting Sadiq Bey and getting rid of John Collins puts them as more of a Quinn Snyder team already. So I have less curiosity about that end. I actually think some of the Murray Young stuff was a little overblown, as far as like they were negative when they were on the court together, but not by a lot. They were better when both were off. Like, some of those numbers just don't really, they're not so extreme that I'm worried, and they're so confusing that I kind of take them with a grain of salt in general. And then they passed to each other and whatever, however you want to slice that up, I think way more than people want to pretend like they did. Like, it worked like a lot of double guard, perimeterly oriented teams operate, like, at the end of the day. How different was it than Boston with Tatum and Brown? Not too much, right? So but defensively is where I really am curious about this team, and why I pick Snyder is because it feels like we're on the downside of Clint Capella, which means Onyeka Okongwu comes in. That's not how the way that Okongwu is best is not how Quinn Snyder has liked to play. And again, they don't have the same level of size and length and stuff that I think Snyder's best defensive teams maybe had. So what do you think on that side of the floor? And then we can get to the guy we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be really interesting. I'm generally with you on the offensive side real quick because, they played at a top 5 offensive level once he took over, and that's what this team is geared to do. And I think that there'll be tweaks. I think it'll be much more modern approach. They'll take more threes. Nate McMillan is like, it gets to be reductive about how old school he is, but it is kind of true on some level. He likes mid-rangers. He likes to do his ISOs, and like it'll look more like a modern offense in a lot of ways. But defensively, you're 100% right. I feel like it kind of goes to the Trae thing too on that end of the floor. And my friend Glenn Willis, who does great stuff on the Hawks, always says this when we talk about it as well. It's a consistency thing. Like, as a team, the Hawks had these great flashes, and like the next step in a lot of ways is like, can you actually do it every night? Like, not all 82 because nobody does that, but like do it 70 times. Be consistent every once in a while. And defensively, that's a lot of it. And look, I ranted and raved about this last year. They were so bad at the point of attack last season, and that's another thing where it's not just Trae. Trae's part of the problem, don't get me wrong, but DeJounte was pretty bad. Other guys, Bogdanovich is, at this point, very good on offense and not very good on defense, let's just say. Other guys involved, young guys, etc. What I would say is they had 48 good minutes of center play, especially on defense, which is usually a heck of a formula to build your defense, right? And they were so bad at the point of attack that it didn't matter in a lot of ways. Your point on Capella is a good one. I do think that people are a little bit in a rush to bury Clint Capella. I think he's still a quality defensive player. Is he as good as he was 2 years ago? No, I don't. That's probably fair. And I think it also is one of those things that everybody does, and I'm guilty of this. We all are, of like, the guy behind him is the young, flashy toy. So like, there's even more of an impetus to be like, okay, old man, out of the way. We want to see what this guy's going to do. And my job is to push back and say, Clint's still pretty good. I mean, especially defensively as an anchor, and he's such a brilliant communicator and all that stuff. But one thing I'm wondering about, and I look forward to kind of poking around about this year even more so, is Quinn. I don't know that Quinn has to play that way defensively. I think a lot of that is that Quinn had Rudy. You know what I mean? I don't think that Quinn is necessarily married to playing the way he did in Utah defensively. It just made every sense in the world when you have the guy who was probably the consensus best defender in the league, or always top 3 in the league for the majority of that time, to build your system around Rudy. That made perfect sense. Okongwu is not Rudy in many ways. So I look forward to seeing that. But certainly, I think that Quinn, while Brendan cheated and picked Quinn as his most important player, if that was an option, I would have gone that way too. I mean, the Hawks are saying this too, which is kind of I can see both sides. Like, they didn't really do anything this offseason except for get worse by trading John Collins, and they're kind of putting all their eggs in the hey, we have Quinn Snyder basket, and I get that because Quinn's an awesome coach, but he kind of is tasked with not single-handedly, but being the main difference in a 41 win team, basically back-to-back seasons, and taking that team and being they're looking to jump into the high 40s or whatever it's going to be. And like, coaches can do a lot, but it's a lot to put on him. And I do think that defensively is the obvious side, because on offense, this is again too simple on purpose. If you have Trae and enough shooting, you're going to be good on offense. How good is the margins? But it's a top 10 offense with Trae rolling out of bed in the morning. And I think it could be a top 3 offense if everything goes right. Defensively, they've never, even when they made the conference finals run, they were basically playing maybe league average defense for a couple months. And that's the high watermark in this entire run. So Quinn's going to be tasked with kind of building that side of the floor back up to where it was. And the personnel, honestly, is not great still. So some coaching magic on that side of the floor will be necessary.
Yeah, when he played, one last thing. When they if he can just get them to be better in transition defense and rebounding, I think that would go a long way, because I think those were two things that they did in that conference finals run. And if you look at the personnel, even though they've downsized and Collins isn't there, Utah played small after they got rid of Favors and still were good on the defensive glass. So I do think that's an emphasis of his. You'd hope that even just the yelling at everybody about it all the time or whatever it takes could help there and clean some things up if you're not getting battered on the offensive boards every night. But yeah, let's go to player we're going to be talking about, Chris.
This to me is Onyeka Okongwu. I mean, I think that to me is, I think there's at some point he's going to usurp Clint Capella as the best center on this roster, if not the starter. I don't know what that looks like. Maybe there's a trade to be made with Capella's salary or something. But I just love Okongwu.
Okay, hold on. Let's back up. You always say, I don't know, when you're giving the case for this stuff. Do you think Onyeka Okongwu should start? Do you think they should trade Clint Capella?
No.
Make the case for our guy. We want to interview Onyeka Okongwu, Chris. Pump him up.
That's true. I would trade Clint Capella, but you have to do it in a way that you're threading a needle with that kind of trade, right? Like, you have to bring something back. And is it also lumping in some of your young wings? Is it whatever picks you do have access to, which isn't all of them because of the DeJounte Murray trade? It's not the easiest world trade to make. It just isn't. When you're trading someone like that who will have to get paid by the next team, but you also need to improve, it's tricky. I think Okongwu is going to be the best center in this team by the end of the year. His profile is amazing. He's incredibly smart. He can kind of do everything you'd want him to do. You look at his cleaning the glass profile, it's just like, yes, he maybe fouls a little bit much, and I would kind of want to know if Brad thinks like that's just what that is. Like, if the numbers are noisy, if there's something to be fixed there. But block shots, get steals, rebounds on both ends. Like, it's a very complete center, despite the fact that he's not this 7-foot behemoth. He is awesome, and I think real basketball nerds already know. But I think this is the breakthrough Okongwu year.
Yeah, I mean, a lot to get to there, and I'll breeze through it. But yeah, I mean, it's a weird situation. I always say I'm pretty surprised that entering year 4 of Okongwu, that they're both still on the team. And I say that not as a value
I wouldn't have guessed that.
It's just very surprising that, especially because of what you just said, Chris. If you told me, number one, I love that draft pick from a value standpoint. It was the best player available pick. And they already had Capella, and they said, you know what, we just like this guy this much, we're just going to take him. And I like that. And I had him rated very highly. It's just the crazy part is for Okongwu to have, I'm not saying he's a proven starter, because he's not. He's not been tasked with that yet. But the fact that I think we know he's good already. We already know, we've seen him play well in the NBA over a fairly large sample size. If you told me that, and then you also told me Clint's going to still be on the team in year 4, I would have been baffled by that. That makes no sense to me in a vacuum. But then you go to, I've gone back like months and months and months, and it's like, okay, should they have traded Clint by now? And I think probably yes. And I say that as someone who is objectively quite high on Clint Capella. I just think asset management wise, all those things, like, it would have made more sense at some point to move him, even this summer. But there are reasons not to too, and it's sort of the overarching thing with this Hawks team is like, what are you actually trying to do? Like, what are your objectives organizationally? And there's some meddling from the top and ownership, which I will avoid as I can on this podcast. But it's like, they know that if they trade Clint, they'll get worse, and they just not wanted to get worse objectively in that way. And Trae loves Clint, and that's not the reason they're keeping him, but like that partnership makes a lot of sense, and it makes total sense. And that's why they traded for Clint in the first place.
And doesn't it kind of feel like that Miami series is a little bit of a harbinger of like, well, we might have two good centers, but what happens if we only have one, and then there's no backup, and then we're really exposing Onyeka and all that? Yeah.
That's the thing, and it's like, and you watch their, when the Hawks beat the Heat in the play-in this year, which did happen, which is hilarious that happened in the play-in. They just mauled Miami on the interior, and Clint had like 25 rebounds, and it was incredible in that night. And it's like you see those flashes, and I'm not anyway. But Okongwu is the guy. And by the way, they're so different. Like they're both, other than just kind of being non-shooters. Everything else about those guys is so objectively different. They have to play differently. That's something I'll be interested to see how Quinn handles that too, because it's like hard to, when you're two guys, your whole theory is we have these two awesome centers, but they play differently. It's just this odd thing. But Okongwu, I still like the answer from Chris. Like I think Okongwu is the combination of a guy who is young enough, who has real pedigree, who we already know is good. Like he said, like we know he's good, but like how good is he going to be? I don't know. But I look forward to finding out. I just think that even Hawks fans, as you might imagine, are clamoring for more of Onyeka, and they want to start him. The thing is, I don't think you can realistically start Okongwu with Capella on the roster. I just don't think that works. Like just politically, salary cap wise, if you wanted to clear the decks for Okongwu, you need to trade Capella. He's too good to come off the bench for a team that's projected to be the 7th seed in the East. You know what I mean? like. And they didn't do it. And every year they flirt with trading him, and they just haven't pulled the trigger yet. It happened last year. It happened this year with Dallas. It happened with I have endless lines of this, but at some point, and I've said this for literally 3 years now, they have to make a decision at center, and they just haven't made it yet. And I think it's eventually going to be Capella traded. It could be in the next month. It could be in February. It could be next summer. I think by next summer, the smart money would be Clint not being on the team anymore. But I don't know when it's going to happen.
Yeah, don't love the Dallas package or whatever it even could look like for them. Just what I think Atlanta needs. I don't really think Dallas necessarily has.
That's the problem, also, Brendan. It's like they don't want to trade him and get nothing back. Like they could have moved him by now,
and they shouldn't.
Right. That's this weird thing where they could trade him to 10 different teams if they don't worry about what was coming back, and they just don't.
Well, they can't do what they did with John Collins. I think is the very simple way to put it. They can't just dump him and get off
at the same time. And I will refrain from my long explanation on Collins, but like they handled that as poorly as humanly possible. They single-handedly killed his trade value and held him and held him and held him and tried to trade him to the point where they had to in their minds, but financially, give him away. And you couldn't give him away and Capella away in the same offseason. Like that would have been a disaster. It already kind of was a disaster the way they handled Collins, but yeah, I mean. You're right. That it's very similar. And like Capella's value is just going to keep going down and down as he gets older. Even if he's a good player, it's just like you got to make a choice.
Well, that's the other part I was going to say. It feels insane that Clint Capella is 28 years old, 29 years old.
Yeah, he's been in the league for a long
nevertheless. Time. Yeah. All right. So mine is, and we can go quick on this one because I don't actually think that there is necessarily a ton to talk about with this guy, but I have AJ Griffin as mine. I don't think he's the highest ceiling player just because I think his athleticism is not elite, and his size, stature, and I mean he's 6'6", 6'5", 6'6", but doesn't profile as the type of dude to me that's going to have some sort of like all NBA upside or anything. But I just think he's a player who I expect to, whether it's at the beginning of the year or if there are some other trades along the way, slot into this rotation and just make a positive impact. And that's a pretty nice hit in the later part of the first round in the draft, which they tend to do a lot of. I just don't think he got a lot of attention last year. So I think he will get it this year, and I hope he plays, and he played plenty last year. So that's mine. Who is yours, Brad?
I was going to say Okongwu. So Chris
perfect.
Stole that from me. The other sleeper, I will just say that I'll say the name out loud of Jalen Johnson. I think he is a guy that people, if things break correctly, we could be talking a lot about him in the future.
Very hastily done Clint Capella trade before we move on. Lou Dort and Kenrich Williams for Clint Capella.
Yeah, I flirted with OKC, and they just don't want to do it. I don't think they want to do it. I think they want to.
Yeah, let Chet live, man.
Well, yeah, I don't. But Chet also might just get like bullied into the ground if he plays as a full-time five right away.
There's the theory of Chet and Wemby both doing the kind of like we're going to play the four a lot situation.
Well, there's the team that I cover literally just did this with another kind of
No,
potentially generational skinny big man.
with
I
a
get
spread a spread 4, right?
Yeah,
shooting
stretch
4.
4. Yeah,
I do think that exactly. I do think that Clint would help OKC a lot. I just don't know if they want to go that direction, and I don't blame them. Like he's just kind of he's a very particular fit, and I think honestly we mentioned Dallas. Dallas is the team that should want him the most in the whole league. I would argue is Dallas. It's just that they don't have a perfect. In fact, I know this happened. Dallas wanted Clint, and Atlanta said, "Okay, give us Josh Green," and Dallas said no, and that was kind of the discussion that happened.
Yeah, but my thing is, like, do they even need Josh Green?
Well, no, but you know what I mean. Josh Green's an interesting potential two-way wing, and that's the guy you asked for. But you look at the rest of
course,
Dallas'
it's absolutely the way the negotiation should have gone. But I guess if I'm Atlanta, I might be looking elsewhere. I mean, I don't know who I would target. I was thinking in the back of my head. I mean, very much a wormhole that we don't have to go down, but the Ayton thing, if it doesn't happen with Portland, maybe if Portland is really sold on they don't really have any centers on their roster right now if Nurkic goes out. So maybe that's one where they could trade, I don't know, maybe you get like some salary in Nasir Little or something. That's ugly.
But why does Portland want a 28-year-old Clint Capella?
I don't really know why they want a 25-year-old DeAndre Ayton, to be honest, but if they're sold on a center.
Yeah, at least you could say with Ayton, and I know how you feel about Ayton to some extent, and I'm not the biggest Ayton guy in the world either, but at least you could say he's young enough to kind of grow with their guys.
Yeah.
If they liked him a lot, like, okay, he might be your guy for the next 7 years. Capella's not going to be their guy for the next 5 years. I mean, he's just too, it's not, as you point out, it's not really an age thing with Clint. It's a mileage thing, and the way that he's going to age is not going to be great, I don't think. So I don't know. Yeah. There are teams that would benefit from Capella, but I don't think Portland's probably one of them. I mean, he'd make them better, but they don't want to be better, do they?
No. So last year's best lineup, guys, to pivot there, Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, DeAndre Hunter, John Collins, Clint Capella. Of the high-volume lineups, that was the best one. This team's starting and closing lineup was good. Does it have to get much more complicated? I mean, one of those guys is not on the team, but what's your best lineup, Brad?
It has to change now. I mean, it's one of the challenges with this Hawks team in an overall sense, especially without Collins on it, is building a team that has a theory on offense and defense.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably the number one question that I have, honestly, is there even a single lineup that you like on both ends of the floor with this team? And the answer may be no, but maybe you lean into offense. So I think that if I had to guess their best lineup, oh Lord, the problem is DeAndre Hunter. I don't think is particularly good, and he's their only small forward. So I would say if I had to guess their best group, I might just say that same group with Sadiq Bey. The other option would be you go super offense on the perimeter. It's Trae and DeJounte for sure. But if you using Chris's example earlier, if you want to have a Congo out there, you kind of need Jalen Johnson for the size, and those guys partner a lot together on purpose, and it makes a ton of sense. But if you do that, you kind of need some more offense because Jalen's not a great shooter. So maybe you go to Bogey at the 3, and you're kind of small. But I think Bogdanovic is probably their 5th best player or 4th best player, honestly. It's just the fact that it's tough to have him in that lineup because you have the other two, you have the 2 guards, and that's tough. So anyway, my runner-up, fun, quirky lineup would be Trae, DeJounte, Bogey, Jalen, and Okongwu.
I like it. What did you have, Chris?
I went Trae Young. Obviously, he's the straw that stirs the drink. I went DeJounte Murray. I went Bogdanovic. I think there's just like a need for what he is, even if there are some concerns that where I'm trying to shoehorn him in, health provided, which obviously not a guarantee with him at this point. It's been rough sledding. Then I go DeAndre Hunter, and then I went on Kongu. I'm just going to believe I'm going to stick my neck out there, and then he is just going to be that guy this year. I think you got Capella in there as well, and you could convince me some sense it should be one of those guys at the 5. I don't see a lot of 5-out possibilities here, but I'm putting just the guys that I kind of trust on this team right now, but I would be willing to be told that like by the All-Star break, someone has usurped Bogdanovic or they've made a trade or something where there's a clear answer for that 5th spot.
I don't think I'm not picking on you, Chris. I don't think that they would ever get a stop. And it's not because of Okongwu. It's the fact that if you play those 3 perimeter guys with Hunter and Okongwu, they would never get a rebound. It'd be fun. It's
not great.
Though.
That's true.
But no, again, the big question is, do they have 2-way lineups? Because I could build so many offensive lineups that probably can't be stopped. If you put two shooters around. I mean, objectively, Trae, DeJounte, Bogey, and Sadiq Bey, that foursome with a center is unguardable. You can't stop that foursome. It's just that you couldn't. They can't stop you either. Is the problem. So it's like pick your poison, and again, you're putting a lot on Quinn to figure it out. But I think that's maybe the hope is that he can kind of piece it together.
Yeah, I didn't go too far out of the box. I mean, when a team has a pretty successful lineup and most of the pieces roll over, I'm not going to get too far out of the box. I'm glad
you just trade your four for nothing. That's the solution, is to trade your power forward.
Yeah, well, that too. But no, I'm glad we hit on the Jalen Johnson Okongwu thing. It feels like we're probably too early for that to, over the course of 82 games, be like statistically the best lineup that this team throws out there. Also, because I'm not even sure, like, over the course of a season how much it'll actually play that exact lineup. But either way, it's one that I'm intrigued by, and it's probably the best, as far as what it looks like right now, way that they can get to an Okongwu lineup, so to speak, right? So I like that.
Rebounding wise, playmaking wise, just versatility wise, and also on the flip side, you kind of need Sadiq Bey at the four when you play Capella, because Capella and Jalen Johnson don't mix very well. They just there isn't the same sort of benefit from Johnson's burst, because his offensively, like that there's just not enough space there, we'll say. So I think you'll see a lot of Bey and Capella and a lot of Johnson and rabbit holes.
What do you got for best case, Brad?
Ooh, best case is. Do you need a win total? Is that what you're asking me for, or just what?
We have over under coming. So this is just vibes. Just vibes.
Best case vibes. The best case vibes is this team is best. Honestly, best case is that they're number one in offense. I wouldn't say that's happening. More modestly, I would say top 3 or 4 in offense. Phoenix obviously is going to be probably incredible offensively. Sacramento was offensively incredible last year. We know that. So I won't say. Denver, of course. I won't just say number one, but like best case is reasonably a top 3, 4, 5 offense in the league, and a top 18 defense. You know what I mean? Like trending toward league average. And that formula is a 50-ish win team on paper. You know what I mean? That if you just say top 5 offense and league average-ish defense, that's a high 40s, low 50s kind of win team. And that, I think, is where I would probably put it. That's very broad, of course, intentionally. But that involves, Trae being more like the guy he was 2 years ago, getting enough shooting around him. That was the big problem for them on offense last year, was the lack of shooting. They just flat out didn't have enough shooting, which it blew my mind, and I yelled about it a lot. They went from having Herter and getting Gallinari and just didn't replace those guys with shooters, and it didn't make sense, and they paid for it. But I believe more in the offense than the defense, but that's the theory of the case. It's just elite offense and just enough defense. 50-ish wins.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was trying to think, what could they be who from last year could they be? And then I really just kind of settled on they could be the 2021 Hawks again. I mean, like that.
Yeah.
That they get enough structure
that year. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, that like basically they get enough structure. I think your point about the identity and the vision on both ends of the floor is a good one, and it goes back to the Snyder conversation, but it's like, can they get enough from the tertiary pieces to provide a little bit of stability and structure on both ends to form that identity, and ideally, knock down some more shots and create a few more turnovers and some of the stuff that they were doing back then, to basically probably not make the conference finals because it's not COVID year anymore, and maybe Ben Simmons isn't between them and the third round this time, but
Ben.
Be as good as they were, right?
To back you up on that, post All-Star break in that season is the only time for more than a week or two in the Trae Young era where they have played like anything close to an elite basketball team in the regular season. They went 25-11 in the last 36 games that season, and it was because they were playing as like the 12th best defense in the league versus where they have been in the 22 to 26 range. And the offense is, but that's exactly what your theory of the case is the second half of that season. And obviously they're not going to be that good, I don't think. But we're talking best case scenario, sure. I mean, again, if you told me right now they would be the 12th best defense, I mean, they probably would be. I'd probably pick them for 54 wins, that kind of thing. Like, because I buy the offense. I mean, there's a limit to it probably, but as long as Trae is upright and they have enough shooting, the offense is going to be good. It's just the defense is the pivot. So I like that, Brandon. Good job comparing the Atlanta Hawks, because
The
the
team
playoff
to themselves. Yeah.
Well, of
I
course,
really,
but the playoff thing is what it is, though. Like, that's gotten memed to death, of course, and for good reason. But they still had to go. They won that game 7 in Philadelphia. Like, they had to go. They won a couple games where it was like, and they also pushed Milwaukee in that series in a way people kind of forgotten. Like, they didn't get blown out by Milwaukee either. So
and like
I'm gonna get emotional if we
round...
start talking about the history in which Atlanta wins that series, because my life has felt very different the past 2 years if it's not Milwaukee in the finals.
That is probably, you're probably right about that, Brendan, I would say. But no, it was, and look, I'm not trying to say that they should have won it, but it's just hard. I'm sure you guys didn't empathize, but it's like the Hawks' big problem I shorthand it with the Trae Young era, but when they've been good, the last 3 years, competitive, they just haven't been able to string it together. That was the only time. And that seems like the outlier, and I get that. But best case scenario, that's what it looks like, I guess.
I would also just you dusted the Knicks that series in the first round that year, absolutely just crushed them.
And that was basically non-competitive. I mean, granted, that was a very different Knicks team than the one that currently exists, but they beat them soundly. And by the way, they were just the better team. Like, that was not even that. Not to go down that rabbit hole too much. The Hawks were the better team in that series. Like, even coming in, I was like, why are the Knicks aren't very good? I mean, it was one of those things. Anyway.
Yeah, best case I have the same. It's, do they have a two identity? Just quintessential elevate them. And I think for me, if we transition this to worst case, it's just, do some of the issues and some of these fringe guys that haven't fully found themselves. I mean, Hunter, Griffin, and Bay, Jalen Johnson all kind of have, to varying levels, things to figure out, things to prove, things to solidify themselves as real guys. If those don't figure themselves out in a meaningful way, do you end up somewhere similar to where you were last year, just because some of this other things don't accelerate, and that maybe keeps you from that two-way identity? For sure.
We've seen it 2 years in a row. That's not the absolute worst case, of course. I know injuries aside, but it's a maddening case but sure. I mean, I surprised someone on a similar podcast to this. Like, I was asked to do a Hawks season preview, and I said, this season really pivots at the forward spots. And they were like, really? And I'm like, well, yeah. I mean, generally speaking, I think we kind of know what Trae Young is. We kind of know what DeJounte Murray is, even if it's not like he's not a star like he was kind of billed to be, but he's a very good player. We know what the centers are. Obviously, flip them around if you want to, but they're both good players. It's the quartet in my mind is what I've been saying. It's DeAndre Hunter, it's Jalen Johnson, it's Saddiq Bey, and I guess AJ Griffin is he's more of a wing, but you know what I mean. Those four guys is, I think, where the season pivots, because, and especially if I had to go back to the first question of this whole discussion about whether it was most important player or pivot point, because my pivot point player is DeAndre Hunter, and that's not a sexy thing to talk about, but nationally people think that he's been better than he's been. He's just not. He has not been particularly good through 4 years. He's not been
in my notes. I know it might sound like I'm piggybacking. I have Quinn Snyder / Hunter, and we just didn't have time. So,
well, you guys are plugged in a way that a lot of people aren't. But it maddens Hawks fans, because anytime you get a national broadcast, someone he was a former top 5 pick. His counting stats look okay. If you see him on the right night, he makes a few jump shots, and you get really excited. If you watch him all night in, night out for 4 years, he has not proven to be what I would describe as a starting level small forward in the NBA, except he's been the starting small forward for the Hawks for the last 3.5 seasons, because he's kind of all they got. If he's the same guy he's been, there's kind of a ceiling on what they can be, in my opinion, especially if he's going to play 35 minutes a game. Maybe he gets passed, but the problem again is that he's archetypally their best defender on the wing. So it's like this give and take, and I think it's like the most boring thing in the world to say this season pivots on those 4 guys, because they're not sexy. But I really do think the difference between 42 wins and 47 wins for this group is those 4 guys, and if I have to pick one, it's probably Hunter.
All right, worst case, and we don't definitely have to get into this, but I just said Trae might be gone, right? I mean, if we're really just going the absolute worst case that you could imagine, this is usually actually where the local hosts go, or local people go, Chris, when we bring them on, is they just have the full meltdown brain. But
you know me, if I was more emotionally invested, that might be where I go. No, listen, that's true. I think there's been some talk about, even you guys probably missed. I think it was earlier, maybe this summer, or maybe at the deadline last year. There was this talk about like Trae being available, and it's like, no. But we've never ever approached the point where the Hawks have looked to trade Trae Young. And I don't think we'll probably get there. Now, could Trae ask out if they have another 41 season? That's, I think, where you're going with that is like, if they disappoint again, it should not surprise anyone if the very famous former All-NBA guard looks around and says, I'd like to go somewhere else. Like, that's just kind of what happens sometimes. So, that's certainly a place that it can go as far as worst case scenario goes. And again, I don't think it's going to be the Hawks giving up on Trae. I think the Hawks would pivot around Trae pretty hard before they try to trade him. But Trae is a very confident guy. Like, I think Trae, I've never heard anything about him trying to get out now, but he lives in LA most of the time. Like, he's been tied to big cities, and he's kind of he likes to be the center of everything. And if he wanted to get moved at some point, if they don't win, he likes to win. I mean, for all the knocks about Trae, like, he's a very competitive dude. Like, if they go out and win 38 games again, that'd be 3 years in a row, and no one's thrilled by that. So I think Brennan's on the right track there as far as like actually worst case for sure.
All right, so I still did have the over. Just to make the case briefly, the number is 42.5. They have been a roughly 41 to 47 win pace the past 3 years, and kind of were statistically what their record said they were last year. But I think for a variety of reasons, we expect some of the young guys to continue to get better, the coaching impact to be a little bit higher, maybe the identity to lock into place a little bit more. I think that's good enough for 2 wins. Maybe, guys get a little more out of each other between Trae and DeJounte than they did in year one. And I just think that the talent is a little bit better than 500. So I actually feel pretty good about that one. What did you have, Chris?
Over. I everything we agreed. I just believe in Quinn Snyder. I believe in Trae Young. I believe in Okongwu. I believe in a lot of their old guys. Like, I just think even if 2 of the 4 wing guys pop, that's probably enough. You don't need all 4 of them to be good. The beauty of having Hunter and Bey and Jalen Johnson and Adrian Griffin is that you don't need all of them to work. You probably just need 2 of them to be really good, to be solid and good. And I think that's going to happen, and I'm going the over as well.
You guys know me. I am always Mr. Positive, but I am on the over here. I've been saying it since the number came out. I'm not saying it's a lock because it's not. Certainly, things could go wrong. They could win 41, 42 games again. But I think more often than not, they go over this number. I think it looks more like it did 2 years ago as far as archetype. And that's when they won 43, which isn't like that wasn't a soaring over, but they actually underachieved point differential wise 2 years ago. It was like 45-ish win pace. I think I'd have him for like 45, 46 coming into the year. This is very reductive. I don't mean it that way, but I do think that Snyder in a vacuum is probably worth 3 or 4 wins over McMillan over the course of 82 games. I do kind of think that, and I don't mean that. David McMillan is a proven veteran, long-time NBA head coach. Is not a buffoon. Like, people talk about him like he's clueless, and he's not. He's just, I think, for this roster and this makeup, and the fact that, look, I think Snyder's really good. I think he kind of proved that he's really good in Utah, and that over the course of 82 plus, just getting a little bit more out of Trae, all that stuff. Mid 50s, mid 40s in terms of wins, and that's an over, and I'm standing on that even as the resident skeptic around the city of Atlanta.
Here's the last thing I'll say about this, and this is maybe just to shoehorn Damian Lillard in any way into this conversation. Atlanta is the team. Yeah, Atlanta is the team to me that if Toronto or Miami does get Dame, and I guess the Bulls are willing to, but if it's either Miami or Toronto, I feel like the Hawks are the team that should be most pissed off and feel like they're getting screwed a little bit. Because the path for them to be not in the play-in is just staring them in the face. Yeah. And if Dame goes to one of those 2 other teams, the path is just more congested. And I just seeing like Cleveland or New York, or like, again, Philly could blow up tomorrow and I wouldn't be surprised, but the other teams taking a step back is a little bit harder to see. Atlanta has a window if Dame is not coming to the East, but if he comes east and it's Miami or Toronto, I think it becomes just the path for them not being in the play-in, even if they are better, gets just a little trickier in a way that would really piss me off if I was Atlanta.
Thanks for saving the SEO on that one, Chris. Now we can put how Damian Lillard affects the Atlanta Hawks season.
That's correct. No, and that's right. I mean, we're a little bit ahead of media day as you and I and the 3 of us are talking right now. It's just, I'm anticipating, as most teams in this range would, the stated goal is going to be get out of, like, don't be in the play-in this year for the Hawks. And so through that prism, I mean, just doing the math on that, like I think a lot of projections that I have seen so far, it's still pretty early, are going to have the Hawks in that 7 or 8 range, maybe 6. But nobody's going really higher than that I've seen so far. And it's like, if you add another team to the mix, especially if it's someone like Toronto below them. And look, I should at least say another name for Brennan's SEO. The Hawks did talk extensively about Pascal Siakam trades. And this is a team that still has I would say, what's the kind way to put this? An owner that is hands-on is the word I'll use, and would like to make another splash and doesn't like to lose, but also wants to watch his pocketbook and all that stuff. So this is still a team that could buy. We should at least throw that out there. Like, they tried to actively go get another star in Pascal Siakam this summer, and they were fairly close to doing so in July. So, like, I don't think you can just for sure lock in this is going to be the same team now as it is in February. It might be, but they are still, I think, looking to maybe, they're already pushed in a lot. They might push it even further if they could show some signs of life.
I agree. All right, let's end the Just Basketball show there. Brennan's just not plussed about Dame, I guess. Look at not plussed about Siakam in Atlanta.
Brennan's writing the SEO headline right now to this podcast.
I'm just daydreaming about Yusuf Nurkic starting in the Valley of the Sun. So I'm in my own world over here.
No, you are not. Well, maybe you are actually, just in more of a nightmare, I would imagine.
Yeah, maybe.
That's just one man's opinion from Atlanta, but there you go.
Yeah. Real tough stuff for you, my guy. Real tough. But that's going to be the Just Basketball show ending here. Another round of our season previews. Thanks again to Brad for coming in and talking about Atlanta. Brad, this is long overdue to have you on. Looking forward to doing it again when Trae Young makes a WWE SmackDown appearance or something like that.
I'm happy to come on anytime for either of you. I'm sure I will probably invite each of you on my podcast when the Hawks play teams that you cover in the coming months. But thank you for having me. I'm a listener to this podcast. I'm a supporter of your work. And if people are not already invested in this podcast, maybe if for some unforeseen reason people are listening to this podcast for me for the first time, subscribe to the show, and it'll be better next time when I'm not on it. So there you go. Stay tuned.
I don't know about that, but please subscribe. Do us a solid. We'll talk to y'all next week.